A presentation, How Consumer Behavior Has Changed in the Last 30 Years. Hello and welcome. My presentation tonight is on how consumer behavior has changed in the last 30 years. But for me to give a presentation on this subject in about 8 minutes, in my opinion, is not fair to the subject matter. So I'm going to present as much information as I can to plant the seeds for further study by the student and the listener. Let me begin with the definition of consumer behavior. The first one is by Wikipedia, and I'm just going to go ahead and bypass it. You can read it if you want to off the screen, but I will get to the second that says, in simpler terms, consumer behavior is the actions a person takes in purchasing and using products and services, including the mental and social processes that come before and after these actions. Now, in this frame, I'll discuss a consumer purchase decision process and experience. Here I show the pyramid, which is the hierarchy of needs, and the 5 stages, which I list because the pyramid's a little too small to read. But the first one is problem recognition and perceiving a need. The second is information search and seeking value. The third is alternative evaluation and assessing value. The fourth, purchase decision and buying value. And finally, the post-purchase behavior and the value in consumption or use. And with the hierarchy of needs also come safety needs, social needs, personal needs, and self-fulfillment needs. Now here I want to talk about before and after. Do you remember before? Before the Walmarts and the supercenters, a lot of American consumers would purchase tools, dry goods, staples from the local general store or country store. A lot of consumers refuse to shop at Walmarts these days. And the fact is that by the end of 2017, there were 4,672 Walmarts throughout the United States. That includes discount stores, neighborhood stores, supercenters, and Sam's Club. Walmart stores were founded in 1962. But it is also because of social, economic, and political reasons consumers move on to new trends, changes, and technologies. So when the local country stores began to phase away from America's small towns, and which are now practically extinct, how was consumer behavior affected? One more note. The bad news for Walmart is that Sam's Club is closing 62 stores nationwide. I wonder why. Now to rewind a little bit, I want to get into the 1980s and 30 years ago. What was new and what was trending? Sears, Roebuck and Company was the #1 U.S. retailer. According to the LA Times, the 1980s was a decade of dangerous buying. It was the decade of the postal note and the personal computer. But there was also double recessions in the 1980s. The Sony Walkman was already out, the camcorder was at all family events, and the fax machine was soon to come on the scene. Coffee makers were taking up counter space, and so were the bread makers. In the auto industry, the Mazda Miata hit the road. The Ford Taurus, also known as a jelly bean, came on the scene. While it wasn't technologically new, it was used well. And the Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager was seen by American families as an alternative to the station wagon. Sales of electronic products surged from 100.6 billion to 256 billion. Now, in this frame, I talk about today's choices, how we buy, what we buy, why we buy, compared to 30 years ago. Cars and cars, why we drive what we drive, and how the global industry gave us more choices. Women, for example, now account for 68% of new car buys. Then there's computerized technology, PCs, mobile devices, robotics, drones, even my robotic vacuum cleaner. But I remember back in the 90s when I was in sales, and all the sales staffs were provided a new cell phone. They were these huge Motorola's, and boy, I was psyched. I thought it was the best thing to sliced bread but it was this big old. It was like a walkie-talkie, but I could go anywhere and call my sales manager and ask him a question or talk with one of the other sales representatives. But compared to now, there's a big difference. And then I get into television, TV networks, cable TV, and Netflix. Back in the 80s, I remember Comcast, a few extra channels, no flat screens, old cable boxes. But in marketing, was the impact to TV commercials explosive or was it gradual? It seemed to be kind of gradual because now you've got commercials 24/7, marketing 24/7. And then I'm going to switch to shopping trends. Are brick and mortar stores on their way out, just like country stores? But is Walmart on the way out too, with the competition of Amazon? So that's how consumer behavior has changed a little bit. Next, I want to talk about social media, how it's taken over other forms of advertising. Newspapers and magazines, for example, I'm surprised they're still around. And lastly, I want to talk about food and groceries, how we buy our food, and has it really changed that much in 30 years? With the exception of self checkout, our food still comes in cans, and with another exception of health food stores, they've changed radically some of our behavior, but pretty much, we still buy our food and groceries. We go to the grocery store. Um, Now, here I want to talk about consumer behavior yesterday and today, from the baby boomer generation to the X generation and onto the Y generation, also known as millennials. 30 years ago, the baby boomers were at the height of their game, but back then, a PC home computer was just coming out. Minivans were produced to compete with the station wagon. Monthly bills were paid by personal checks. And today, it's a new set of generations. Uh, it was recently reported that hundreds of millennials have already saved $100,000 by the age 35. Better savers or just better wage earners or better consumers. Today's consumer is watching more on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and much more social media. On their mobile device or PC, it gives marketers a wider window to bring awareness and information to consumers. Targets are defined. Age groups, cultures, subcultures, genders, much, much more. The auto industry is aware that women are now buying 68% of new cars, and it changes how companies target and market old ideas with new technology or new ideas with innovation and success. And in this frame, I talk about today and what we are seeing and experiencing, consumer empowerment. By the beginning of the new millennium, the internet profoundly changed consumer behavior. The era of online shopping dawned. Between 2003 and 2004, online shopping in America had risen by 26%. Um, this talks about how the internet really changed consumer behavior. And this is only the beginning, 10, 12 years ago. With the advent of consumer-driven online and open source innovation, consumer empowerment was taken to a completely different level. Consumers were now actively engaged in designing product and services to meet their needs and were acting as advisors to the service providers. So how did this happen? More for everyone to think about. Now in this frame, I just provide a link to a YouTube video on millennials and how their purchasing behavior is evolving. So you can take that and look at that YouTube, on your own. And there's my sources. Thank you very much.